Hi folks, this is the first of two videos on the film Waking Life. The first video will focus on the form and the second one will focus on the content. Since Waking Life is the first film in our class, we're going to use it as an example or as a piece for learning how to talk academically about films. So one of the goals for us is to understand how to actually read a film. When you watch movies, in your everyday life, you might just think about what the story is, what the characters are like, and whether I like the movie or not. But when you consider films from an academic perspective, we want to ask some deeper questions. We want to know just not what is the story or what are the major plot points. We want to understand how does the film actually convey those plot points? What are the mechanisms of film production, the choices that the filmmakers and the actors are making to tell the story in a particular way? Because those choices often have significance. And we can understand the philosophical or the deeper meaning of the movie by often thinking about how those choices are made and what the purpose was. For example, let's just look at the title of the film, Waking Life. Titles are carefully chosen by filmmakers, so don't let this early clue pass you by. For every one of the films that we watch in this class, you should wonder what is the significance. And good titles often have many layers of significance. So it might not be readily apparent. For example, Waking Life might be trying to tell us a bunch of different things. Waking Life, not just the title Waking Life, but being awake, your waking life is no different than your dream life. Maybe that's what the title is supposed to be suggesting to you. Or maybe waking life is totally different than dream life and what it is to dream. Is that what the title's supposed to make you think about? Or is the title just establishing a theme? It's not saying anything about life. It's just establishing this theme. What the heck is waking life like? What is our experience of life? How does that work? What is its significance? Is it just a thematic title? Or is it making more of a philosophical claim like waking life and dream life aren't really that different? Maybe it doesn't matter one way or the other. Maybe the significance of the two is the same. So maybe there is no nothing matters between waking life versus dream life. Could it be all of those things? Well, some of those ideas are actually inconsistent with each other, but maybe the title is suggesting several inconsistent things simultaneously. So maybe by the end of these two videos, you'll actually be able to make up your mind and defend an interpretation. Because another nice thing about thinking about why the filmmakers make certain decisions that they do is you can then use those bits of the storytelling artifice in order to prove a point, in order to argue for something. So we're not just looking for your reactions to these films. We're looking for you to defend interpretations of the films. And to do that, you must be identifying evidence and reasons for understanding the film in one way versus another. Now, the fundamental distinction in film studies or the academic consideration of film that we need is that between form and content. And like I said before, this video is going to focus more on form, and the next video will focus on the content of the film Waking Life. Form has to do with the structural features of the filmmaking, and we can group those structural features into a couple different categories. We can talk about the sound of the film, or the editing decisions that the filmmakers made, or the visuals of the film, like what types of shots are made and what their composition is like. In discussing sound, there's a distinction that's really important between diegetic and non-diegetic sound. If you haven't seen this term before, diegetic sound just means the sound inside the fictional world. So when a character is talking and another character in the fiction can hear them, that's diegetic sound. Or when somebody shoots a gun and it goes bang, that sound is sound in the fiction that characters ought to be able to hear. That's diegetic sound. Whereas films often, especially Hollywood films, often have like an orchestral score. That orchestral score, that's non-diegetic sound. That sound just intended for us, the audience members who are not in the fiction. We're outside the fiction in order to hear. It's not like when the score is playing in Star Wars, and it's this dramatic moment between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader battling. It's not like they turned on the orchestra music and they're listening to that score. That's just for our consumption. So some sounds are diegetic, some are non-diegetic, and how those sound decisions are made and played with are a key part of the filmmaking decisions. Or consider editing. So editing can invoke many different things. Editing can be incredibly rapid and create the pacing of the film that way. It can be really slow and you can stitch together one or two shots in the entire film. There's some films like Russian Ark, which are made with entirely just one shot, or other films like 1917 that are actually made from several shots, but they're edited together to make it look seamless. So they're trying to convey something with the pacing of the film, where the film is supposed to give you the sense of one continuous bit of action. What does that affect? What effect does that have on the audience, and what is the filmmakers trying to achieve with that? Visual composition and the choice of shots. This encompasses many different things. You know, how the actors decide to play a certain character in a certain scene. That is something that comes across visually. It might also come across in the dialogue and the sound too. How set design works. How set design and cinematography, the lighting of the scene, affect the color and the perception of that. All of these are very careful decisions made by the filmmakers. Shot type refers to like a close-up shot of a character versus a long shot or a two shot of people in dialogue. Establishing shot is like the shot of a scene where you see it from a distance, where you often are supposed to get the context. It's sort of like setting the scene in a traditional play sense. Camera angles. That camera could be, you know, angled from high, looking down on the characters. It could be a low camera angle. All of these things can convey information to the audience. I gave you, if you read the handout on thinking about concepts of filmmaking, I used this term mise-en-scène. What I want you to do, stop your videos now and see if you can figure out in which of these three categories mise-en-scène would fall, if you understood that concept. Okay, that was your chance to stop your videos. Mise-en-scène actually goes down here. Mise-en-scène just refers to the arrangement of the images on the screen. Sometimes the lighting really creates a strong division between the left and the right-hand parts of the screen, or between what's highlighted in the foreground and the background. So all of these things, maybe sometimes a shot of a scene or of a dinner family is actually shot from outside through a doorway. And so you're not sort of getting this intimate feeling like you're at the dinner table with them, but you're divided between them, and there are walls between you and them. And it creates a very different effect. So all of those things have to do with mise-en-scène, and that's a visual structural part of the filmmaking. Now, what I want you to do is consider the film Waking Life and apply these distinctions. So how can you begin to analyze the formal features of this film? And then what we're going to do in the next video is try to use those formal features to understand some of the film's themes and its ultimate philosophical point. For example, how is sound used? Let me just give you a couple examples I've got, but there are many that you could have come up with in the film. One thing the film does is it mixes diegetic and non-diegetic sound in a really interesting way. We, for example, have this score of string players, and oftentimes when the main character is floating in a disembodied way across the city, we have that score playing. And then what we later realize is actually that's not just a score, that's diegetic sound too. That's coming from within the dream world. People are actually playing it. And what this does is this has this really interesting effect of breaking down the barrier. It's like it's interrogating, it's deconstructing the diegetic, non-diegetic distinction in a wonderful way that establishes this theme of breaking down the distinction or the dichotomy between being awake and dreaming. So this is sort of a beautiful use of and deep use of sound. And that's just one example. There's many examples of sound in the film. Here's an editing decision. How you transition between scenes is an editing call. Like whether or not you have a sharp cut, or whether or not you have a half second of black or white, so you between scenes, whether you cut to the black or white, or whether you fade to black or fade to white. So one thing this film does is it uses fade in an interesting way. It fades from black and white to color. And this is a really interesting editing distinction because it establishes this question of the subjective experience of dreams. Color is often a metaphor for meaning and significance. So something deeply saturated in color can be a metaphor for something of deep significance. And so this again connects with this theme of the meaning of dreams and how we give them meaning through our subjective experiences of them. That's one thing conveyed by the editing. That also nicely ties in. So this isn't just a random editing decision too. You might think we're over-analyzing films when we're talking about all of these interesting formal features, but Waking Life is a nice film because directly invokes a lot of these themes in other ways, like in the dialogue, and that makes us look for some of these deeper connections. For example, this cab driver character, who's sort of a goofball character, he has a bunch of long bits of dialogue, as many of the characters do. This is just sort of a film with stitched together speeches and conversations. He talks about how coloring is significant and how our approach to coloring symbolizes or is a metaphor for our approach to life. And we shouldn't be worried about coloring outside the lines. Now, the visual decision as well to make this an animated film, that connects with this theme of coloring. And that ties in with the third, that sort of connects this segue from the editing to the visual composition. So the technique here is called rotoscoping, where this film was actually shot as live action with real actors. And then it was post-processed with software in order to give it this animated feel. And when it does that, there's this constant shifting, and sometimes the internal color blobs of these characters bleed outward. And that again is using color in the film in order to establish this theme about how coloring is a decision that's made. And we need to make decisions in our lives as characters. Our existential plight is to be making these decisions. The filmmakers' decisions that they're making becomes this perfect metaphor for what they want to say. So these formal features of the filmmaking precisely tie in with its philosophical significance. Here's one other way that color and editing are used together. So remember this scene where this guy is giving this really angry diatribe. This is shot with a really rapid editing sequence, and it kind of causes this disorientation. This connects with the way that it's shot, where we sometimes get these close-up shots of the character in his face. Sometimes we can't even see him in the shot. They're so close. And those decisions give it this deeply intimate feel where we're stuck right inside this person's personal space. But usually when people are acting like this, anger pushes us away. And what we want to do is step back from this character, but we can't do it. That's sort of if you were standing in a room with a person like this, we would slowly create more and more distance between them. But the camera doesn't let us do that. And the rapid editing creates this greater anxiety and heightens the tension in the scene. Notice how the decisions of color making do the exact same thing. His face is like glowing red with anger, and the way in which that contrasts with this very desaturated gray sort of prison cell exterior, again, heightens the tension and it heightens the focus on his emotional state. So both editing decisions about how the scene is edited and these visual color decisions about the composition of the scene are creating the effects that the filmmakers intend. A couple other remarks about the choice of shots is this highly subjective use of animation, where the visuals actually portray the unrealistic, in an unrealistic way, the content of what the person is telling, the story or the speech that they're giving. This is sometimes called expressivistic filmmaking, where it's not like in reality we imagine this guy's face turns to a bunch of gears. Rather, those gears are creating a subjective expression of this experience of what he's telling us. So it's rendering visually, metaphorically, or symbolically the content of what he's telling us. This is sometimes called expressivism in filmmaking, where it's departing from a really strict kind of realistic approach. So what you need to ask yourself is, what are the filmmakers trying to tell us by using this deeply expressivistic sorts of decisions in these compositions? For one thing, it brings into focus the stories or the content of what that character is saying. But at the exact same time, it does so there's many ways you could do that. You could do that in deeply realistic ways too. It does it in a way that invokes this theme about our perceptions of reality and our perceptions of being awake versus perceptions of dreams, where the film itself is kind of like a series of dreams. It has, because dreams have these bizarre, hard to make sense of, sort of incoherent, highly expressivistic elements. So the film itself becomes a metaphor for a dream through some of these filmmaking decisions. All of these ways are are bits of evidence from the decisions in editing versus visual composition versus sound. You can use these elements of the film as evidence for interpreting the film in various ways. And that requires actually thinking about it. You have to not just wonder, oh yeah, that was a fun film, sit back and enjoy yourself for 90 minutes. What you need to do is have a piece of paper and pen next to you, make notes, stop the film at various times and note the timestamps about when things are happening. This will help you actually marshal an interpretation of the film based on the things that you can appeal to. When you're doing the assignments later, like writing a paper about this film or doing the visual an audio commentary on this film, what we're going to be looking for is you defending an interpretation of it using bits of evidence, precisely like I'm giving you examples of in this video here. So again, the distinction between form and content is really essential when we're talking about movies in an academic way. This video has been talking about formal features. Those are the features of the film that the filmmakers put in there, how they tell the story, not just what the story is, and the types of decisions that they make having to do with sound editing and visuals. Okay, thanks.